Going nowhere, doing nothing, hopelessly divided, and now chasing down the rabbit hole of socialism. That's the Democrat Party today. America needs some damage control, surely. Look at this. House Democrats were supposed to vote today on a measure condemning anti-Semitism, but they can't agree on the wording. What? If you can't figure out how to condemn anti-Semitism, you shouldn't be in Congress. Speaker Pelosi has lost control. Wednesday, the Homeland Security Chief alerted Congress to the crisis on the border. 1 million illegals will arrive this year. And that, she says, quote, will overwhelm the system entirely. But the Democrats refuse to do anything. No wall, no immigration enforcement either. They'll do nothing. And get this. There are Republicans in the Senate who will vote against the president's emergency declaration. Talk about fiddling while Rome burns. We should call this the Nero Congress. And what do you think Congressman Jerrold Nadler, what do you think he'll be doing for the next 2 years? Desperately trying to undermine the president with round after round of investigations, hearings, probes and subpoenas. Not into Russia's role in the election, oh no, but into the president's businesses and his family. The objective is clear. Find some dirt and undermine the president. That's it. On top of all of this, there's the looming 2020 election. Yes, I know it's still 21 months away, but did you know the Democrat debates begin in June of this year? 14 candidates have already declared, and there's more to come. Imagine the circus when they're all on the stage together. You think anything's going to get done in Congress while they're all jockeying for position? Notice I haven't even mentioned socialism, which is also splitting the party. A dysfunctional party in a dysfunctional Congress, and America has to pay the price. It is a mess, and it is the Democrats' fault.
The vote was 407-23, with Iowa's Steve King voting present. But this has been an epic struggle all week. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi forced to defend one of her controversial and high-profile freshman members.
It's up to her to explain, but I do not believe that she understood the full weight of the words.
A reference to Minnesota Democrat Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who suggested those who support Israel have dual loyalty, and that being opposed to Prime Minister Netanyahu and, quote, the occupation is not the same as being anti-Semitic. The anti-Semitic resolution noted that the House of Representatives condemns anti-Semitic acts and statements as hateful expressions of intolerance that are contradictory to the values that define the people of the United States. But after an internal battle among Democrats, the name of the resolution was changed to anti-hate and was broadened to include a wide range of bigotry victims: Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, the LGBTQ community, immigrants, and others with verbal attacks, incitement, and violence.
We're sadly living in a time in this country where we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism, a rise in Islamophobia, a rise in racism and bigotry.
Rallying to Omar's defense, some of her fellow high-profile freshmen. New York Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been tweeting her defense of Omar to nearly 3.5 million followers. There seems to be no problem at all with a zero-tolerance stance for simply asking about U.S. foreign policy. And Michigan Democrat Rashida Tlaib went even further.
I can tell you, when she speaks about those issues, what I hear is her trying to uplift my grandmother in Palestine, in the West Bank, and saying that there are real, actual, factual evidence to show that there's human rights violations.
Republicans sounded stunned by the civil war on the other side of the aisle.
There's a fracture, obviously, in the Democrat Party. There's a radical leftist fringe that's really intolerant, particularly towards our Jewish friends.
And now some Democrats are upset leadership caved.
And when one of our colleagues invokes the classic anti-Semitic tropes, the anti-Semitic language, that Jews control the world, that Jews care only about money, that Jews cannot be loyal Americans if they also support Israel, this, too, must be condemned.
Republicans say the shift to the left is shocking.
This is not your father's Democratic Party. If it was ever more obvious than today, I don't know when it was more obvious. They can't agree to condemn anti-Semitism.
Some sources suggest this signals possible trouble for Speaker Pelosi and her leadership team over the next 2 years, when you consider this non-binding resolution was really quite a struggle this week.
Breaking tonight, Nancy Pelosi refusing to condemn Ilhan Omar. She actually said she didn't think Omar's tweets were intentionally anti-Semitic. Really? I mean, Do I have to remind Speaker Pelosi that this was hardly the first anti-Semitic incident from the freshman Congresswoman? I mean, come on, at some point, after what has now clearly become a pattern of behavior, you got to admit what it actually is, right? Let's be honest. Because no one believes that Ilhan Omar is doing this unintentionally. Shame on the Democrats for not calling out this hate. They spent so much time going after Donald Trump, accusing him of hate speech, accusing him of racism, and yet they refuse to call out the likes of this Congresswoman from Minnesota, Ilhan Omar, who has made basically her hatred of Israel abundantly clear to the world. The Democrats refuse to call out the hate speech of Louis Farrakhan, a man who has said such despicable things about Jews that he ought to be completely ostracized by the entire world. And yet, he is held up as a leader by the likes of the women that organized the so-called Women's March. Come on, the left complains about hate speech, right? They're telling high school students they can't wear the MAGA red hats. They're accusing students that dared to post Trump signs on college campuses of hate speech. For goodness sakes, colleges were out there banning Trump signs during the presidential election. The candidate that has been chosen as the Republican nominee, it's hate speech to say you support him? Why are the Democrats the ones determining what hate speech is when they cannot recognize the hateful anti-Semitic rhetoric of their own party? The Dems have many problems right now, from socialism and their fascination with it to anti-Semitism. And if they continue on this path, they should be shunned, entirely shunned by all of America. Israel is, will, and should always be our ally. And we're lucky as a nation to have so many extraordinary Jewish Americans. So my advice to Nancy Pelosi tonight, be very careful of this moment. Show some leadership, please, and call Omar's rhetoric out for what it really is.
Well, the news comes as allegations of anti-Semitism grip Britain's leftist Labour Party, with New York Magazine asking tonight, can anti-Semitism split Democrats like it split Labour? So are Democrats here in danger of losing Jewish members of their own party over their handling of what Speaker Pelosi called early last month deeply offensive anti-Semitic comments by Congresswoman Omar? Well, today, Pelosi called the latest Omar comments not intentionally anti-Semitic. Let's bring in Zuhdi Jasser from the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and former Republican Senator from Minnesota, Norm Coleman, who's also the national chairman of the Republican Jewish Coalition. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll start with you, Senator. What do you make of Nancy Pelosi seeming to soften a bit on her characterization of these comments?
I think she's getting pressure from the left, and that's what this is all about. I actually applauded Speaker Pelosi and Steny Hoyer, the old Democrats, who originally, said, listen, this isn't right. Omar is an anti-Semite. Not everyone that criticizes Israel is anti-Semitic. Not everyone that criticizes someone who's Jewish is anti-Semitic. But if you have someone who repeatedly issues the target traffics in the classic tripes, Jews control politicians with money, they control the media, and they have dual loyalties, that person is an anti-Semite. So that's what you have. Pelosi originally criticized it, and then I think had to step back because the far left is pushing back. And unfortunately, that is the base of the Democratic Party today.
Well, and we heard in the Washington Post headline, there were several reports on what happened behind closed doors today. House Democrats erupt in protests over indirect sanction of Representative Omar for alleged anti-Semitism, because they're still saying they're not going to include her name probably in this resolution. The article goes on to say House Democrats erupted in fury Wednesday, challenging leaders over indirectly sanctioning freshman Representative Ilhan Omar. Zuhdi, what do you make of that? I mean, that there would be that much heat that they cannot get together in a uniform voice on this particular issue.
That tells you that the Pelosi-Hoyer leadership is really they'll sacrifice anything at the altar of identity politics. And at the end of the day, we see happening in Congress where the UN went, which is the red-green axis. You have the coalition of the far-left socialists in the world, the dictators that are socialists, along with the Islamists, and sacrifice that is the Jewish community. And I have to tell you, as an American Muslim, it is offensive to me that she's not held to the same standard. If she was not Muslim, there would have been unanimous rebellion rebuke and it wouldn't have even been an issue. But she's being coddled and infantilized, and we're not being treated as equals. She's not being given tough love. In fact, they're denying that it's anti-Semitism. I would ask the Democrats to look up the State Department's report on what new anti-Semitism is. The definition of new anti-Semitism is the generalizations about Israel in a way in which to make the Jewish community appear in a bigoted way against them, and to generalize in conspiracy theories. All the things she's trafficking in are canards of tropes of bigotry against the Jewish community that is classic new anti-Semitism, and the Democrats are making fools out of themselves by not taking the bull by the horns and teaching her on-the-job training, which shouldn't have to be done, of what anti-Semitism is.
Yeah, and this is not the first time. As we've talked about, there are things in the past, but more than one occurrence since she joined Congress. Congressman Cedric Richmond said this. He said, I think there's a big rise in anti-Semitism and racism, and that's a bigger conversation we need to be having, but it starts at 1600 Pennsylvania. It doesn't start with one member out of 435 members of Congress. Senator, what do you make of them pointing the finger back at the president?
Well, I think they're trying to avoid dealing with the reality they have in front of them. And the reality they have in front of them is a member of Congress who's anti-Semitic, who serves on the Foreign Relations Committee. These are, by the way, this is not just new anti-Semitism. This is classic anti-Semitism. Talking about Jews controlling the media, big money controlling politicians. The new anti-Semitism is what she's also part of supporting, which is the BDS movement, which is a way to say Israel shouldn't exist, so we're going to drive Israel out by boycotting, et cetera, sanctions. And so that's the new anti-Semitism. But what you're hearing from Omar is classic anti-Semitism, and the way to deal with that is classically point the finger at somebody else, and that's all this is about. Democrats have to deal with this, and there is, I'm not, as head of the Republican Jewish Coalition, I'm not the one to counsel Democrats on how to solve their rifts. But clearly, there are Democrats. This is Israel, and support of Israel has been a bipartisan issue. That's changed. That's changed. The far left Democrat base is moving the Democrat Party away from support of Israel and tolerating this kind of classic anti-Semitism, which really breaks my heart.
Yeah, and Zuhdi, quickly, what do you make of the fact that we're told the resolution is being broadened to include anti-Islamophobia as part of the language?
It's offensive to me that there's a moral equivalency between what the Jewish community has been through post-Holocaust and up to Pittsburgh recently, and to compare that to the, yes, there's some palpable anti-Muslim bigotry, but there's no way to compare it. And in many ways, you water it down. We were told the same with the Black Lives Matter movement, and now we're told if we said all lives matter, that's insulting. And yet, when it's clearly there's no moral equivalency between anti-Semitism and what's been happening post-9/11 to Muslim communities, it's offensive, and we should not insult Muslims by saying that there's some equality there, and it's a very different narrative.
Zuhdi Jasser, thank you very much. And Senator Coleman, great to see you looking so good. Great to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you
so much.